Sheila Hamilton. Welcome back to Beyond Well. This is a place where we talk about the interior, and some of the topics that we take on are things that we cope with as human beings every single day. Depression, anxiety, and 1 in 3 people suffer from suicidal ideation. Today, I'd like you to meet a young woman whom I met after learning that she also lost her husband to suicide. Leslie Abraham joins us today on Beyond Well to talk about being a suicide loss survivor and all of the things she also wishes she'd known when her husband fell ill. I want to frame suicide in the way that I've heard you frame it before, Brian, where you've talked about, for many people, it's experiential avoidance. It's the ultimate inability to deal with what's happening in your life.
Yeah, it's a solution to a perceived problem. I don't like the way, I don't like what I'm experiencing. I don't like how I'm feeling, and I'm looking for a way to not have that experience, to not have that feeling anymore. And the ultimate way to do that is to cease all feelings and all experiences.
Right. And so many people do it in different ways, numbing out with food or drugs or alcohol. What is the thought process of how suicide actually becomes an option?
I suspect that the process is different for different people. But I think the reality actually is that being in pain is universal, and actually wanting to escape pain is pretty universal, and actually having some consideration about, I can't think of another way to solve this problem, and it needs to be solved. It is a problem, and it needs to be solved, and I would consider maybe taking my life. That's actually very common. I think the data on that tells us that 1 in 3 people have had a point in their life where they've considered ending their life as a way to escape their pain. And, 1 in 3, you just count off. There's 4 of us in the room, so you're either a 3 or you're sitting next to 1 pretty much. So I think it's actually very common.
Leslie, talk to me about the history of, first of all, I always like to, because suicide is so, in some ways, so sensational, and people focus on the act of dying rather than their life. Tell me about your husband, who he was, and what attracted you to him.
Well, we actually grew up together. I knew him from the time I was 10. And so, we grew up in the same church, and we went to middle school and high school together. So, it was kind of an admiration from afar. Our families were friends, and we would do stuff together as families. And, I always enjoyed hanging out with him. But he was this guy who was a friend to everyone. I mean, everybody loved him. He did not discriminate who he hung out with, who he played basketball with, basically anybody, that would come and have a good time with him. So I loved that about him. And we hung out a little bit in high school, and then not until actually my senior year we started dating. So I was 17, and we dated for about 4 years, and then helped each other get through college, and we ended up getting married.
Wow, so he was your first love, really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, so we were, we grew up together. I mean, we honestly formed this life, built this life together. And, I think back to the book Sheryl Sandberg wrote, Option B, and we built this Option A, and so now I'm in Option B. And I love the quote. She goes something, when Option A doesn't work out, kick the shit out of Option B.
That's what you're doing. That's what you're doing, kicking the shit out of Option B.
Yeah.
You were 6 months pregnant when he started not sleeping.
Right.
What were the stressors that were going on in his life that made you think, oh, this is not going so well. He's not the guy I grew up with.
Right, exactly. Well, he had, some stress at work. There was stuff going on and in the family and things. And so he did just go for a routine checkup, and was misdiagnosed and put on a medication that then made it so that he couldn't sleep. And it just went from there. And so, we went back and forth to primary care, switching off and on medications, and it just, slowly and gradually and then quicker and quicker just spun out of control. What started as kind of a minor problem turned into this beast of a monster.
The difficulty for me as a person who's researched this now and had the exact same experience where my late husband was having a lot of stress. He ended up being misdiagnosed by a friend, a doctor. He didn't even see a real doctor. A friend just gave him antidepressants. And he went into this state of akathisia where he was skin crawling, could not sleep. It's the kind of really tremendously psychic, like monster pain, apparently. And he was going to do anything to try to get out of that. And since then, I've written a couple of articles for BP magazine, and I receive hundreds of responses from people who have had this very same thing, where they're misdiagnosed, they're not sleeping, they're having this skin crawling, I can't stand where I am, I've got to get out of this, and this is when the suicide takes place. Is this something that you've heard of before, Jenna?
Well, certainly akathisia and akinesia, which are two side effects you can get from lots of different medications that we use for things, I used to describe them when I taught to my students as it would be Dante's inner circle of hell. Like if you can imagine this tremendous feeling of internal restlessness and just like your skin is crawling. And then when that is combined with akinesia, this inability to initiate movement, it just sounds like absolute torture. And you can sort of see how the mind could very quickly go to, oh my God, I can't take this. And then, Leslie, when you were talking about this difficulty sleeping, boy, if there is, when I'm seeing somebody who is in a really dark place, two of the very first things we try and tackle are you sleeping and are you eating? Because there is not a whole lot that we can do to change kind of our internal experience of suffering super quickly. Like there are things we can do, but it takes some time. But the things about fueling your body and being able to find ways to sleep are just so absolutely important. Essential. Absolutely essential. Yeah.
Nothing else can really follow until those two things go into place. I found it fascinating that the first thing that they did in psychiatric care was just put him to sleep.
Sure.
I think he slept for like 4 days. Sure. They just drugged him to the point where he didn't sleep. Was your husband ever committed to psychiatric care?
He was.
And how did it go?
Not very well. And they did. That's what we wanted. Is what happened to your husband. We wanted them to just put him to sleep, but for some reason, that wasn't the route they took. So they tried different medications, did different tests, and the system failed. I mean, it was just trial and error, and there was never a solution.
Were you visiting every day and getting that increasingly doomed sense in your heart that this was not going well, and yet there's this protocol for how many days they're supposed to be in, and then boom, you're out, and there's no follow-up, and you don't actually have an appointment with a primary care doctor, with a therapist or a psychologist. Like there is this idea that the inpatient is going to stabilize you, and in fact, it often doesn't. And then you're released, and in fact, there's no follow-up in place.
Yeah.
And in fact, statistically, that's the time most often when people die by suicide is in the first day or two after being released from psychiatric care.
And I'm not surprised by that because you almost feel like, okay, going in, okay, there's hope. They're gonna find something. They're gonna find some solution. So then when he was released, we were just more hopeless because another therapy, another something couldn't help.
Yeah, that's an experience I have with clients I work with. Like very often, I'll have clients who will so badly want to go into an inpatient unit because their hope is, there's going to be the answer there. And our system is just not set up that way. Like inpatient units these days are mainly about how do we get this person to not kill themselves for the time being. It is not set up in a way to help the person. The social workers, they're primarily social workers who are working in these inpatient units, do an amazing job of trying to get people set up with resources once they get released. And yet so many people fall through the cracks. And then you're exactly right. People have, like I've had clients come out and they felt like that was their last best chance. And then they feel even worse when they come out.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's perceived as a higher level of care, not just in intensity, but like it's a higher level of care. Like it will give me more help
Right.
than an outpatient therapist or
Right.
some other thing that I might be able to do. And so when you come out having simply stabilized or transitioned to different medication,
Right.
and that's it, then
Yeah.
it's like, well, what else is there? We did the inpatient thing.
Right.
Like
Yeah.
we went all the way to the top and it didn't help. And like you said, Jenna, that's not really what inpatient care is about these days.
Yeah.
Leslie, were you, was your husband verbalizing any of his thoughts of suicide at that point? Was he talking to you about, I have to end this, or I can't do this anymore?
Yeah, he would go back and forth, and it was almost like a conversation with himself. He got in this kind of obsessive, cyclical thinking, and he would say, I can't live anymore. You know, he wanted me to be able to live a normal life. And then he would say, but I don't want to die. You know, if I can just get better, I'll be the happiest man in the world, you know, and if I can just go back to work and be like everybody else. And so he kind of would get on that wheel of, I can't do this anymore, but I want to live, you know, and, you know, so ultimately it was completely devastating when he did, because I thought that, you know, he had fought for so long, 6 months. I thought, surely something's going to
break through.
And yeah, because he's fighting so hard.
I remember, Brian, you talking to me because I couldn't understand that that suicidal thinking. You described it as a racetrack with no off ramps, and I was like, wow, that's such a great visual image for me. That ideation is this like looping around the act becomes very, very important. The act is sort of the thing, the release of pain, right? Or the thought that it's going to be somehow the be-all, end-all, of course. That's how illogical the thinking is. But Brian said something so fascinating in our last episode, talking about the question that he asks his patients who are suicidal. And I want you to share that with Leslie, if you would.
Yeah, it's this idea, if I had a wand, if I had a magic wand, if I could grant you a wish, what would it be? And my observation was, I don't think I've ever had anybody say, I'd like you to kill me. Right? That is not, it's not so much that I want to die, it's that I don't want to be living the way that I'm living. And I can't seem to get a hold of the idea of living a different way than I'm doing right now, or find a way to carry my experience such that I can still do other things. That it's like, yeah, I don't want to die, but I don't want to do this.
Right. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
If you could have talked to him, I mean, one of the things that I keep thinking of is if our family could have been introduced to people who suffer from anxiety and depression, who were going through financial stress, who weren't sleeping, but who were still living, and who decided that there was a method for them to go forward. If in the hospital somebody had said, hey, I have this diagnosis, or whatever you want to call it, I'm still not even sure after 9 different diagnoses that we got the right diagnosis. I think it was just human suffering that got out of control. I do believe that if they could have presented to us peer counselors or people who'd gone through really tough time before and said, hey, dude, I have been there, I know it, and you're gonna get through this.
Yeah.
Did you have any examples of people who were providing hope for you?
No, we didn't. And, you know, part of that was we kept this really close, behind closed doors, because, you know, the way we were raised and just our own pride, we didn't want people knowing what he was going through. There was just a lot of shame involved in it. And we thought, oh, you know, we're better basically than mental illness. We're not going to look at this. So
I was wondering about that, because one of the things that you said he was telling you was he would cycle back and forth between I don't want to keep going, I can't do this, and I just want to be normal. I just want to be like everybody else. And I think there's this, and it ties into something Sheila just said, right, about this is just human suffering that got out of control. There's an isolation in that I hear, that this private experience that I have of pain is completely foreign to everybody else's experience. Everyone else is like rainbows and unicorns, and I'm in pain, and I just wish I could be as happy as everyone else is, as though we all don't carry burdens and struggles and pain.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
And that's it, that piece about shame, especially when it comes to psychological suffering in general, but especially around suicide, is just so pervasive. Like, Brian, if you're thinking about kind of the stat you talked about at the beginning, 1 in 3 adults, will acknowledge having seriously and persistently thought about ending their lives. Like, for the listeners, are you having that conversation with 1 in 3 of your friends?
Right.
Like,
Right.
probably
Oddly,
you're not.
I am.
Well, you probably are, Sheila.
They're all like, "Oh, here she comes again,
Here she comes.
carrying
No,
the big
that's such a good
suicide
point,
prevention
right?
banner."
Right. Like, do you know the
Right.
like 1 in 3
Right.
of your friends? Have they come and talked to you
Right.
about it? And we don't talk about these things.
We don't talk about the suicidality, but we don't talk about the pain that underlies it.
That's
My
right. That's
right.
experience
Yes.
is people will say,
Yes.
I don't want anyone to know. I don't want anyone to know about how hard things are for
Yes.
me. I
Right.
don't want anybody to
Yes.
know about this pain that I experience. And at the same time, I think everybody desperately wants to, and that person probably will acknowledge, I just want to be seen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just want somebody to see me. And I think one of the things that happens when somebody shows up in your life who does admit to, like, man, I'm in a really, really dark place and I'm having some really dark thoughts, that oftentimes, very understandably, our response can be, oh God, I'm so sorry to hear that. That's so scary. Are you going to be okay? Are you all right? As though it's like, what you just told me is really, really hard for me to hear. Tell me that you're going to be okay. Yeah, I'm okay. I'm not thinking that way anymore.
Right.
Great, good.
Yeah.
Period, end of paragraph. As opposed to, like, no, I actually want to hear more about that.
Right.
Not so much like I want to hear about all of the ways in which you think about killing yourself, but I want to hear about the struggle that you're having in your life. Like, that's okay. Not only is it okay, acceptable, but that's human, and me too. And you know, like, there's just
In this reporting effort, I'm going to be abiding by kind of safe guidelines, which is I'm not going to be talking about method or means, but I do think it's really important for people to understand that if you begin to see a loved one who's experiencing the kind of things we've been talking about, that maybe they're talking about suicide, maybe they're not sleeping, you've noticed eating changes, you've noticed the kind of lack of interest in the things that they used to love before, and they're no longer interested, remove the damn guns from your home. It's like the conversation we have around gun control is so ridiculous when it comes to suicidal people.
Yeah.
I just don't think there's any way we should still be arguing about the idea of get the weapons out of their sight, because there's already an obsession with an easy way to end it.
I read a recent statistic that said, at least among white Americans, for every homicide with a gun, there are 6 suicides.
Yeah.
Right. And so I don't know, Leslie, if you had the same experience where my late husband, who abhorred guns, wouldn't go even deer hunting because he was such an empath, ended up becoming obsessed with guns.
Right. Yeah. We were the same way. No guns in our house, no BB guns. We just, there was no need for us to have one in our home. And we both were educators and just felt that, it wasn't right. There was no reason for us to have it. So he actually did go out without me knowing and purchased a gun. And it was probably hidden somewhere in the house I don't know. Yeah.
It's important to note that you ended up having to tell your 4-year-old daughter when your husband was found. And I do want to talk about how important it is to do that honestly. And it sounded like you had some really good guidelines for that.
Right. Yeah.
But that must have been so difficult because your daughter was at an age of just so much unknowing, right?
Right. Yeah. So luckily, that day she was away from the home and spent the night at my friend's house. But then the next day I did have to tell her. So in the meantime, I had people that were reaching out to me and helping me to figure out what I was going to say to her. And one of those was the Dougie Center, the people there. Really helpful. And ultimately they said, you just have to be honest with her, because if you're not, she's not going to trust what you say is true. And that'll just all come back around and bite you. So yeah, from the very beginning, I told her he shot himself in his car. And then, yeah, she had a bunch of very detailed questions that were not easy for me to answer, but I did. You know, it wasn't good for her, but at least she doesn't have questions. She doesn't question me.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And she knows that there's somebody always going to tell her the truth about that.
Yeah.
You know, the interesting thing about being a suicide loss survivor is that I think when anybody dies, people have a lot of theories about the way in which your loved one lived and how they died. But boy, when it's suicide, they really have a lot of opinions.
Yeah.
You grew up in a religious community, so did you suffer a lot of other people's opinions about?
You know, not outright. Nobody really said anything offensive, but I would hear things here and there, you know, like, that's the ultimate sin. There's no way he can be going to heaven, you know, things like that. Not directly to me, but I would, you know, hear somebody, oh, this person said this. And so that was really hard. But again, you know, after completely feeling devastated and disoriented, I still felt that shame. You know, I just did not. And in fact, going to the Dougie Center, they have a support group for the parents there. And I related more to some of the spouses whose wives and husbands died from cancer or from, you know, something like that, because I felt that Scott had a disease, you know, and that's what took his life. That wasn't my Scott who killed himself.
Yeah, you know, these days when people ask about my late husband, I say he died after a long battle with mental illness.
Yeah.
And I think if we could start reframing that so that people begin talking about it as, oh, he was suffering from something and he was attempting to try to deal with it and he couldn't deal with it any longer, similar to a disease process like cancer or heart disease. It claims a lot of people and nobody wants to blame someone for it. You know? It's an interesting thing that way. I think being a suicide loss survivor is a particularly difficult time because you do have the shock. You don't have the answers as to why. You have the financial stress of completely not knowing how you're going to go forward. You are 6 months pregnant, even more stressful. And then you have people's judgment on top of it, which other types of deaths, other types of widows don't have. How did you cope with everything?
You know, you kind of went through the same path that I exactly felt. I mean, it was devastation and like really being disoriented and figuring out, okay, how am I going to get through this day every day? Just, you know, getting up out of bed, taking care of the kids. And then the shame and guilt came to play, you know, and that sticks around for a long time. And then I found anger because for me, at least, it was easier to be angry than sad. And so for many years, I have been angry. And a lot of people probably haven't recognized that about me because I don't show it on the outside, but on the inside. And, you know, and with that said, I chose to be angry. It wasn't that I really was angry with him because I had empathy for him and I lived that hell with him.
Yeah.
And so I understood, but still it was easier to be angry.
I'm so glad that you admitted to that because there's so many circles where it wouldn't be okay to say that, where it would just be like, how could you be angry at someone who is sick?
Yeah.
But there is this strange component about suicide that it was ultimately one person's choice. At a certain point, they do decide, right?
Sure. Yeah. And I think what you just did there is this ability to have all these complicated emotions. It's not only that you're sad or that you feel shame. You also feel probably love. And of course you feel anger and all of these things. And that's the difficulty is like, how do you make sense of all these complicated feelings that you have? And we tend to only feel it's appropriate to talk about or even have kind of one set of feelings. And anger is often, especially for women, anger is not one of the ones that you're supposed to be feeling in regards to this. So
or in some cases, relief.
Oh, absolutely. Of course.
Yeah, I have a friend who, in a very different context, she will say, I have a lot of feelings. And I think sometimes she means like, I have this feeling and I have a lot of it. But I think more often it's like, I have a bunch of feelings.
Yeah.
And if I wrote them down on paper, you would say that some of them are opposites. And it's as though there's something in our mind that says that all has to add up and make sense. And I just don't think that's the way we are.
Yeah.
I think you have like great loss. And sometimes if your loved one has been suffering for a long time, you have this sense of like an exhale, right? And then there's anger, and then there's like empathy, and there's love, and there's release, and there's fear, and I mean all kinds of things. And I'm with Jenna. I don't think it ends up being useful to try and sort them out and put like this is what I'm feeling.
Right.
Those are just words.
It's also just particularly complicated because if you notice when Tony, I'm going to forget his last name, the chef, and Kate Spade died within the first week.
Oh, yeah.
Bourdain.
Bourdain. There were so many people that wanted to find the reason why,
Right.
okay? They want to excavate into the personal lives of those people and attempt to find out why. And so many times the partner, of course, is like to blame.
Of course.
Because the partner did something that caused them to do this. Yeah. And I
or
just
didn't do something to prevent it.
Yeah. Right. And
add guilt to the list of emotions. Right.
So I'll just say the part that I finally got to, and I don't know if you'll get there, Leslie, or if you're there now, but I actually added like a sixth component to the stages of grief, which was I had to get to forgiveness, both for myself, for the missing a lot of signs and symptoms of a really serious illness, and also for him that ultimately it was his choice about what he was going to do with his suffering. And no matter how many things I tried and attempted, it was ultimately still his choice.
Yeah, that's interesting you bring that up because probably just within the past year, I've kind of explained it as like, I've just let go. I've stopped holding on to that because for years and years, I would still be researching, like trying to figure out what happened to him. What did I miss? Like I didn't even want an autopsy done on him because I felt like if they found something, then I would know what I missed, and that would make things worse for me.
Wow.
And but I finally, and it's a conversation I have with myself all the time. It's just I just have to let go. It's like a trust fall,
Yes.
Yeah, that's right. That's a beautiful way to
I can't
describe
hang
it.
on to it. Yeah.
Yeah. You're doing this really innovative and very cool thing, and I don't want to birth your baby before you're ready. But but part of also, I think recovering as a suicide loss survivor is deciding how you're going to actually make something out of the suffering. I always have this great image of going down to the depths of the ocean and being compressed and coming back up for air and going, but I have this thing.
Right.
I have this beautiful thing to share.
Yeah.
For me, it's always about how much more I value life. Like because I know that people can get that sick and that hopeless and suffer in that way. The fact that I go out and I am just completely enamored by the spring buds outside is part of the reminder to me, like that's what I brought up from the ocean's depth. But you're bringing up this other amazing thing of helping other people find access to help.
Right. Just from our experience trying to navigate through the mental health system and finding help, it was very apparent quickly that it was a bit of a maze and, ultimately find our way out. And I do say that the system in place in trying to find a provider or professional that can help someone failed us. That system failed us. There wasn't a direct path that we could take, where somebody could help us. So my sister and I have come up with this system which basically simplifies that path to access for healthcare, because now you think of well, it's not cheap to get therapy. This is something that's going to be ongoing, and there's other things outside of therapy as well. And so, we go to our insurance, and most insurances now are covering mental health services. And so then we go there, and that still is becoming, hard to decipher. Okay, well, who can deal with what I'm experiencing, and they specialize in this. Well, what does that mean? Oh, let me go Google and see what that means. And so it's very cumbersome and complex. And if you're new to the mental health system, you don't know, the buzzwords, you don't know what therapies are, it feels hopeless.
Yeah.
And so basically through massive collaboration and some technology, we're bringing together a program that hopefully will provide an easier path for people to find help.
Jenna and Brian, one of the things that I remember so clearly is about 4 years after my husband died, I was driving in Bend, and I'm going over the road, and a friend of mine who's a CEO, she runs a company that has 12,000 employees. She has, 340 managers. She is on it. And she said, my husband is suicidal. And last night I was on Google putting in the words, my husband is suicidal.
Yeah.
And you have 1,000 hits of national resources that have nothing to do with your life.
Right.
You have no language, as Leslie just pointed out, for what is actually happening. And unlike a physical break in the leg where you go to the emergency room and then you get to see an ortho, it's
right.
There isn't a refined system for this. Have you ever thought about the ways in which we could, or even you guys are thinking about improving that system, that delivery of healthcare?
Well, I know, personally at our clinic, we have a very strong mission around trying to help people connect with resources, even if they're not one of the therapists at our clinic. And we actually probably spend way more time getting people set up with therapists outside of our clinic than we do getting them set up with folks at our clinic. Exactly because of that problem. I'm a psychologist. I've been doing this for a very long time. And I still have had difficulty when there are times in my life when I've wanted to find a therapist for myself, navigating that system. I can't even imagine what it's like for people who don't know the acronyms and the lingo and the what to say and what not to say and all of this stuff. So I would encourage somebody, don't try and navigate it alone. Call a professional, call a clinic in your town, and hopefully you will find somebody on the other end of the line who says, I'm not your person, but let me tell you who your person might be.
Super cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Brian, do you have any other, because we're almost out of time, do you have any other suggestions for people who are, if they love someone especially, because what I've noticed more often than not is it tends to be the people around someone who is suffering who says, I think this could be a crisis in the making. Any suggestions for them about how to move forward, even just the mind state that they might adopt in attempting?
In attempting to walk with this person?
Yeah.
I think we've touched on it most likely, but maybe I can reiterate that suicide is such an incredibly, the prospect of suicide is such an incredibly scary thing that it's easy to identify that as the problem or the difficulty. And when your loved one no longer feels that way, to think that then it's okay, good, we're fine. To me, it feels like the thing to do is to try to be as jump in where angels fear to tread, and not have that be just okay, so you're not going to kill yourself, right? Okay, good.
Right.
That it is, I want to walk with you in the stuff that got you here.
Yeah.
And I'm okay seeing you. I am okay hearing what you feel about, and I will walk with you in that. The goal is not for you to be okay, like all of us, the goal is for you to be transparent. And I'll be with you in this journey, and not just me. I will help you find those resources. I will help you search out that whether it's professional support or whatnot. Yeah.
It's also, I think, that idea of changing the paradigm where the strength that we should start valuing is not your six packs and the abs. It's your ability to have the kind of empathy to sit with someone who's suffering, or have the kind of bravery to say, I'm not doing well.
And that means really I don't know if bravery would be the word that I would choose, but although I think it is, to sit with your own distress.
Right.
Yes.
Because if somebody that you love is hurting, it's going to hurt.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That would be the piece that I would add to it, is to, if somebody that you love is hurting, the very first thing you're going to have to do is to be able to be with your own suffering and to make space for that, or get your own support for that. And I guess one thing I might like to add to the conversation is what I think of as the distinction between somebody who is having suicidal thoughts. Like, that is a really common experience. And yet we pretend like people aren't having those thoughts. People keep those thoughts to themselves as if those thoughts are what is dangerous. Having suicidal thoughts is not what is dangerous. It is being suicidal. It is committing that act that is the danger. So if we could actually just talk about, I'm having these thoughts, and as a professional, I'll call out my field. I can't tell you how many therapists I hear who say, oh, I don't work with suicidal clients. Oh, yes, you do. Yes, you do. You just have clients that aren't that aren't telling you. Because if you have more than 3 clients, you're working with somebody who's having suicidal thoughts at some point in their life. And so whether you're a professional or a loved one, like, being willing to hear those thoughts from somebody and then say, I want to know, like, what's underneath your pain. Because the important part about talking about your pain is because on the flip side of pain is what matters to you. We only suffer around the things that matter to us. And so if you can have conversations about what somebody is in pain about, it's also a clue to what would make their life worth living.
Oh, so beautiful. Leslie, I don't want to leave without just saying thank you. I know that this is the first time you've spoken publicly about your late husband's death, and it was just a beautiful, I think, incredible tribute to his life as well.
Oh, thank you very much. I appreciate that.
And I want to just say, I think your business is going to have an amazing place in culture, because it does provide that sort of missing link that we're all looking for,
Yeah, hoping for it.
Yeah, absolutely.
This is Beyond Well. I think we're going to be at episode 12 with this one.
Wow.
Wow.
Thanks again for coming in.
Thanks.
Yeah.